Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
Your life.
Good evening, everybody. This is Dragonology, and my name is Mel B. This is episode 5 today on the 23rd of April 2015. It's 9 p.m. London and Morocco time, and of course 10 p.m. Central European time, which is where we are now, in my home country, South Africa as well. And then of course it's 4 p.m. in New York, and it's already the next day, Friday the 17th of April. So if you're in Sydney, it's 6 a.m. there, and thank you very much for tuning in. Grateful that you're with us this evening. Okay, going to dive straight in because this is quite an intense presentation with lots to get through tonight. Obviously, in the previous weeks, we've been covering off the matter of culture, and following through on that theme tonight, we're going to be talking a bit more about other aspects of our culture. So the other aspects that we've covered off in previous weeks of Dragonology, focusing on the area of culture, particularly pertain to media, theatre, film, sport, art, sculpture, and architecture. Today we're going to be focusing on literature and story, things that we've been told supposedly as fairy tale or myths and legend, that have been passed down in written tradition. And then, as media progressed, we've interpreted them in film, and they've been, before film came along, interpreted through art forms. So it's been excellent to go through this material and actually grasp the various art forms and how it's evolved and how these themes have evolved and how many themes have stayed the same and how very specific that is. So let's climb into that today. For those of you who haven't seen any of the previous Dragonology episodes, please do check out episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. They'll definitely help you understand the context of this material more. But obviously, we do like to as well keep each episode sort of self-encompassing. So I'm just going to do a little bit of revision and recapping here. So my apologies for those of you that might get bored by this, but it's important for people just to get a context. As covered off in previous episodes of Dragonology, we've discussed what the actual definition of myth or mythological is, and there is no widely agreed upon application. However, the term mythology has often been relegated to mean like semi-dismissive or fictitious. So we refer to something as fact or myth, which, to be honest with you, isn't a very accurate way to refer to things, because if you're saying fact or myth, you're saying that myth isn't fact. Well, the Encyclopedia of Mythology defines myths as imaginative traditions about nature, history, and the destiny of the world, the gods, man, and society. They are concepts which deserve serious attention for what they mean to those who believe in them and as statements about the fundamental issues of life. One of the disadvantages of the old-fashioned derogatory use of the word myth to mean a foolish story or a false idea is the implication that myths are in fact trivial. The reality is the reverse. It is the things which people find important that find place in their mythology. And obviously, just framing that into context, we need to take into account that a lot of what we've been relegated to under the title of mythology and taught to believe under this title as actually perhaps fictitious and semi-dismissive may have a lot of truth in it. And if you remember, this is why I wanted to relabel mythology as Dragonology, because as we dive into this, you will get to see that the root of absolutely everything, and in fact, the aim of what we're going to try to do tonight and through the course of this material will be to illustrate that the root origin of most modern day culture is rooted in Dragonology. Now, of course, with everything else that I previously put to you in Dragonology, we use specific colors to indicate specific things. And purple, of course, is representative of anything to do with the dragon. And if you've been with us with the previous Dragonologies, you'll be aware of the fact that the or is a serpent root word, as is the jinn, and it makes up the context of the word origin. Everything to do with cult, ritual, and blood or whatever is obviously depicted in red. And I'll try to stick to these colors so that it's easy for people to grasp, and it helps people learn and basically understand how the various themes pull together. The approach we use is in order to get to the specific aim, which obviously is to illustrate that the root of the origin of all modern day culture is rooted in Dragonology. The approach is through the analysis of symbols, symbolic expression, especially through the etymology and through the application of rhymes, homonyms, synonyms as symbolic indicators. The methodology of this journey, it's important to give you a bit more framing as well, so you guys understand how we go about doing things and the method that we use in order to get to the aim. In order to follow the information in an organic flow, as always, we follow the themes through, cross-referencing all genres of information to find the commonly occurring core root themes, which form a repetitive template, thus demonstrating the connection between all major mythologies and cultural histories. Okay, so let's go back to basics a little bit. And I thought after having spent weeks of going through a whole bunch of etymology up front, with the etymology in place, it'll make what I'm about to discuss a lot easier to sort of understand as well from the symbolic perspectives of the breaking down of language. But there's other symbolic indicators which we need to be aware of, which reference the dragon, and they've often been reinterpreted and played out in different symbolic ways throughout history. And what we need to do is tie them all together and look at what these things actually mean. As we said, the core root theme. First off, serpents. One of the most prevalent symbols and reoccurring creatures throughout sculpture, art, history, and in fact, one of the oldest ritual worship sites, which is over 70,000 years old, which is in my home country of South Africa, actually also has a giant serpent carved in stone inside this ritual worship site, which is in the Toledo Hills in Botswana. And there's nothing around these hills. It's like nothing around. And then all of a sudden you've got these hills, and then you've got this serpent ritual worship site, which is said to be the oldest in the world. And that is because symbols of the serpent are the most prevalent symbolic expression there is. And in fact, they're just a symbolic expression of the dragon, because dragons are the creatures that have the most serpent-like representation in their physical form. So what we're looking at tonight is a lot of physical form representations, and to understand how these things have been sort of reinterpreted through various artistic representations and through various understandings. You know, as people go through history, so we reinterpret things through various labels and various perspectives, and render things as such in our creative capacities. Okay, the sun and the moon is one of the most inextricably linked symbols with the dragon. In fact, I would say, I'd go further on to say the sun, moon, and stars. And in fact, many stars are just supposedly faraway suns. But you also have the Draco constellation, which obviously is a constellation of stars, which make it the Draco constellation. But stars, suns, moons, the heavens generally, clouds, as we spoke about through etymology, all the things, those sort of things that sit quite far above us, are inextricably linked with the dragon through the symbolic expression. And in fact, the sun and the moon start off really where we're going to end up, which is demonstrating the ubiquitous duality of light and dark. And of course, you find the sun and moon turns up in a lot of alchemical depictions, which also have dragons. Some of the things to look at here, and I love this depiction because I think there's so much going on here, which we'll go and cover off tonight. So obviously we've got the sun over here, the moon, and then you've got this orb that you always find that the Virgin Mary or Jesus or a dragon normally standing on an orb, or a solar disk, which is often winged, and we'll get into that again tonight. The wings are often on the other side, so a lot of that symbolism going on here. But also what we've got here is supposedly a moon, sun. We've got a cross here, but notice the wings not only over here where there would be like a appendage, like kind of on their head or behind the ears as well, and also on the feet. And that's something we'll talk about again as well tonight. And obviously the word python written here, referring to the serpent, although this creature is pretty sort of, zoomorphic in a way, a lot of different animals kind of going in here. But the long serpent-like tail obviously wrapping around various representations here. And take a note of this picture because it'll become more obvious as we go through how many symbolic representations of the dragon are encoded into this alchemical depiction. Okay, as just discussed, the disc, which normally has wings on either side, which you can see here, I'll give a clearer picture just now, but what we're actually referring to here is the ureas, which is a pair of rearing cobras, which normally flanks either side of a solar disc. Two different representations here, quite clear. And also, these solar discs, if they don't have the serpents, normally will always have the wings. So the winged sun disc, very, very prevalent in Egyptian art. And of course, you've got the wings turning up here on a person, but also the sun disk appearing on top of what would be someone who looks like they're being worshipped. Notice the outfit looks like scales. Okay, but also it's interesting to notice, if you've been watching the last few Dragonologies, we've been talking a little bit about what Egyptian hieroglyphics mean. And here we've got the resting cobra, which, as you may remember, is actually representative of the DJ sound, the J sound, which is a representation of the royal dragon bloodline. So the J. And as you can see, these are on either side, and you've got them turning up quite a bit throughout here. So whatever this is depicting, it's talking about these, obviously, worship of the royals or whatever is going on. But again, the wings on the person is interesting because that's a theme we carry through a lot with tonight, and we discuss that in great length and detail. It comes up a lot. Egyptian dragons, pretty prevalent throughout Egyptian archaeology, sculpture, and what remains of their artwork. And this is, for example, a gold serpent with wings with a human head. But often the pharaohs often wore them on their headdresses as well. They had the uraeus on their headdress, the rearing cobra on the front there. Now, the winged humans often come up sometimes with other animal features too. The zoomorphic, as we've spoken about, countenance is just a symbolic masking of the dragon, but the fact that you've got the mixture of human with wings, like the angel, for example, this one has a horse head, but notice a very Arabic, Middle Eastern symbology there, because that for me is Islamic symbology. And here we've got a sphinx, okay, and that's obviously a depiction of Oedipus and the sphinx, but it's a human bust and wings. And then, of course, the angels, which for most people would be the most common depiction of this sort of human form with the wings. Now, this is Byzantine art, about 2,000 years old, but this is Roman art here. Interesting to notice, you'll always find somewhere a serpent turning up. And we spoke a lot about the ball, the orb, and in ball sport and stuff last week, Jesus in the Last Da Vinci carrying an orb. This comes up a lot, the carrying of the orb. Now, also notice the obelisk. We spoke about the obelisk and how obelisk is similar to basilisk, which means king of serpents. Very, very interesting, considering this is actually supposed to depict the angel carrying the king and queen to heaven. All right, and what you've got is an obelisk, which depicts the king of serpents, so referencing royalty. Notice all the symbology and the themes going on as well. And of course, a very common depiction of an angel, in white, glowing wings, halo around it, and of course, doves. And we spoke about what doves, Kaluba, and the root of that tying into dragons, and that doves are often symbolic of the dragon. Angel, the word angel comes from the Latin word angui or anguiem, which simply means dragon. And you can actually put that into Google Translate for yourself and see. Put anguiem into Google Translate and the English comes back as dragon. And this is where most words with the A-N-G beginning actually originate from. So, for example, Anglo, which was what became England, also the Anjuvian dynasty, all refers to the same thing. And we go on to talk about the Anjuvian dynasty a little bit later on. But basically, this is how the word originated.
And I've got the L separated out here because we've spoken a lot about the El, Elohim, and El, Al, and Il, the transliterations, which basically would also again refer to light and the angels. So wings are symbols of the dragon, and they turn up quite commonly in various symbolic depictions, which we've already talked about in various dragonology lectures. But let's have a look at this. The caduceus, which obviously is the, beg your pardon, is the symbol of the modern day medical industry and has these spiraling serpents. Remember, spiral comes from the word spiro, which also means dragon. But the caduceus, also known as the staff of Hermes, which as you can see here being carried by Hermes, again with the wings and the twisting serpents. Hermes is often depicted with the wings on his head and wings on his feet, or winged sandals, or is referred to as being serpentipedus, which means dragon-footed. Interesting that. Now we go on to the head adornment section, which, you know, what's interesting to note is that most common head adornments that we've come to know are actually also rooted with dragon representations, such as the mitre, which is the most common, obvious, and most known one by people who have explored this information to some degree. The Pope wears a mitre, as do most bishops and cardinals at some point. And in fact, the mitre does originate with the Babylonian or Assyrian fish god Dagon. And of course, we've got the Dogon tribe, which live in Africa, which also worship the fish god. So, and that's Dagon and Dogon are very similar to the word dragon, etymologically similar. So that's very interesting to note that this they used to wear, or this is how it's been represented perhaps in carvings. Perhaps they were dragon-like, and the way it's been represented is if they were wearing fish to kind of hide the real true form, which seems to be a common theme. They've always been represented in other forms so as not to show their true form. Now, this is a representation of Mithra slaying the bull. Again, notice another serpent over here, the dog representing Sirius. Mitre, which we have just had a look at over here, which is the fish hat worn by the Pope, is very similar to the word Mithra. And we've discussed Mithra many times at great length through the course of this work, and we'll go on to talk a bit more about Mithra, either spelled with an I or a Y. Mithra wore the Phrygian cap, and I've actually put the Phrygian cap, which is also seen on the bust of Attis. This is a 2,000-year-old marble carving. So let's have a look at where the Phrygian cap turns up. This is a department of the Army seal from 1775, the United States of America. It turns up on the top of the sword on the coat of arms, smack in the middle of this particular seal. Phrygian cap is also known as the cap or liberty cap. And we talk again about the word liberty. That comes up quite a bit tonight. So this theme is quite recurring. And this is where else the Phrygian cap turns up. Phrygian cap became the wizard's cap. Now, this gets very interesting because, as you can see, that sort of evolved from that. The Lord of the Rings, which comes up again and again through the course of dragonology, one of the main characters known as Gandalf was also referenced commonly as Mithrandir, okay? As in, this is Mithra, all right? Mithra, all right? So Mithrandir is a reference to Mithra. He is a priest of Mithra and wore the Phrygian cap. Phrygian cap evolved into the hat worn by the Christmas icon, Santa. So this became Santa's hat. And Santa is etymologically cognizant with saint and Satan. They come from the same group of words because they reference the same principle. They've just evolved as different languages have evolved. The Phrygian cap across the world. Okay, so here we've got a Buddhist monk, and we can check the sides coming down. This is how the Phrygian cap evolved over here. But this is Typhon, the most feared of all the Greek gods. And this is a picture of theoi.com. And as we spoke about, theoi is the plural of gods. It's gods. The is one god, Theoi is many gods. Theoi.com, you can find this picture of Typhon, again, depicted with wings, wearing the Phrygian cap with the pieces that come down the side like the Buddhist monk. Very, very distinguishable, noticeable similarity. You cannot mistake that. Okay, again, slight point there, slight point there. Notice this monk has a halo around him. Okay, again, we'll get into the halos in a bit, but what is this? The serpent legs, or the serpent lower half. Again, half human, half serpent. This is a dragon, definitely winged serpent. But what's interesting to note about Typhon was he was considered the sort of Satan of Greek mythology, the most feared of all the gods, and supposedly one of the most horrific. And Typhon is a good example of how they put the names of certain gods backwards to encode serpent root words. And for those who have been following along, the root word Ophi is in Typhon, O-P-H-Y. Obviously, the PH in Greek was one lettered, it's a circle with a line through it, and that would be the phi sign, and it would replace the modern day English of PH. So, but backwards, it would still be Ophi in the original Greek translation. So that's gives you an idea of how they like to reverse language as well. We get into a little bit of that again tonight and again in future Dragonology episodes. All right, looking at more indicators of the dragon, feathers or plumage on the head seems to be pretty common and also has been reinterpreted. This is the serpents at Teotihuacan in South America. And, of course, this is a representation of Quetzalcoatl munching on a human, a Mesoamerican dragon, also known as Voltan or Kukulkan. And, of course, these headdresses inspired many people of sort of those regions. For example, the Native Americans often talk about their snake brothers, and they have, in fact, had their headdresses, and the higher up in the tribes you go, the more feathers you get into your cap, and it's kind of symbolic or representative or tradition carried through from dragon influence. And here you've got a Roman soldier, which this is the American Express logo. And as you can see, these Roman soldiers also wore the sort of headdress that stood straight up on the top of their heads. Again, an influence directly from the dragons. In fact, there was a Roman army called the Dragoons, which were part of the armies that forced a whole bunch of Huguenots out of France, and they were my ancestors. Okay, looking at horns. This is obviously a deadpan, easy giveaway one. Everybody kind of gets this one. You think of Satan or Lucifer, you kind of think of someone with horns. But horns are most likely rooted with the god Pan, who was known as a goat god. And we've spoken extensively about Pan, and we'll show a few more pictures of Pan later on. But obviously the Pan flute taking its name from Pan. And Pan was much like Dionysus or Bacchus, and linked with harvest, grape wine, fertility, and the dragon bloodline, which is often represented by grapes and red wine. And of course, Baphomet is depicted with horns as well. Baphomet, known as the goat of Mendes, we spoke about that. Goat worship is quite prevalent throughout our culture. And this is an interesting depiction of Moses, all right, with horns. And I thought that's real interesting, because if you've been following any of the information that we've been covering off on CCN from various presenters, including Johan Oldenkamp, talks about how Moses was actually King Tutmos III and an Egyptian pharaoh. So interesting to notice, we talk about royalty and all of that being connected to the dragon bloodline. And here we got Moses, very old marble to carving of Moses turning up with horns on his head. Interesting stuff. Okay, and of course the moon goddess Selene is often depicted with a moon on her head, much like Hathor with the horns and the sun on her head. Selene is depicted with the moon. And sometimes the moon goddess is depicted standing on the moon. Over here, as I just mentioned, Hathor, and again we have the resting serpent Okay, the DJ sound, DJ, referencing the jinn or dragon bloodline. But Hathor with the sun above her head, and of course we spoke about this as well. This would either be a cobra or a rearing uraeus. But again, the horns over here, sun in between. And of course, turning up in popular modern day culture in films and Disney interpretations. And here we go, Angelina Jolie in the film Maleficent, and we get into Disney a bit later. As I said, we'll be talking about halos and just how they turn up and their various symbolic significances. This is a 2,000-year-old mosaic of Apollo with a solar halo. Jesus was always depicted normally as well with the solar halo. Halo is just a depiction of the sun, which again masks the dragon. And we talk about the Son of God, and which is why Jesus is referenced as the Son of God, and which is why his holy day is on Sunday. It's not a coincidence, but all these sort of solar messiahs were depicted the same way, with the halo around the head. Buddha and Krishna depicted very much the same way. And then, of course, this was given to the saints and Virgin Mary as well. Halos are pretty common depicted around the Virgin Mary's head. Normally, also with a set of stars. And in fact, the stars going around the circle is a depiction of Europe, because Europe is named after Europa, which is a mother goddess figure, which is, you know, taken on a different name or title and label, but ultimately references the mother goddess, which in Roman Catholic terms is the Virgin Mary. But as I said, saints, be they Jesus or be they his apostles, the 12 people that traveled around with him, much like the gods of the pantheon, the 12 primary gods. Also, it's just a reinterpretation and relabeling. When Roman pantheism became Roman monotheism, it took on different names, but ultimately always depicted the same way, with a halo to depict that there is something holy. Halo and holy. It's etymologically similar for a reason. And of course, we see the Holy Grail here, and that comes up again because we get into that a bit tonight as well. Now, an aureola is just like a halo, again, a solar depiction, but this one supposedly surrounds the whole body. And this is a depiction of the Virgin actually standing on the moon instead of with the Mother Goddess having it on top of the head. But as you can see, the sun rays coming out, aureolas go all the way around the body and have various symbolic depictions. You can see the aureola coming around here. This one's got a halo and an aureola, and of course, lovely little wings there. And sometimes they're a vesica piscis shape, like this, which is supposed to be the shape of the fish, or feminine genital principle, but they're often depicted in artworks all the way around, as you can see here, also with a halo and a cross in this particular solar halo. And of course, they turn up in different religions, but expressly mean symbolically the same thing. This is a 14th century depiction of the Tibetan god Tanka. Very interesting. And an Indian god Shiva. Yeah. Shiva was known as the god of destruction. And this is a 14th century Peruvian manuscript. And this is the Prophet Muhammad depicted obviously in a aureola or a glowing wreaths of flames. And supposedly Jesus and his disciples also with the halos around their head, but depicted in a different way, which is not circular, but like flames, as we've shown here. God Shiva's got a flaming aureola. So light, flame, sun, fire, it's the same sort of principle really that they're trying to depict. And crowns. Crowns, which are worn by rulers and monarchs and those sort of people, also are just another depiction of halos. It's a more 3D depiction of this halo or crown or aureola principle, which crowns have these spikes because they're meant to represent the sun, which is what the halos are. They sort of sun halos representing as we said, sun symbolism represents the dragon. And they come in all shapes and sizes and descriptions. And as with everything, there is no thing done with great purpose and intent without having some deeper meaning. And that's very much true for crowns. And all of them are representative of something different and belong to different ranks and different orders and all sorts. And every shape and description you can imagine there is, but all with very specific purposes. And this thing of crowns has been going on for a long time. Lots of reinterpretations of these things that they wear on their heads. And again, we talk about the gods Mithra here again, wearing a sun crown. And that's evident in this depiction of Mithra, which is the Sol Invictus depiction. Sol Invictus meaning the unconquered sun. And here, again, another representation of the sun crown with rays coming out from behind Mithra. And this is a moon over here. Notice we've got serpents in this depiction and a Phrygian cap. And that's a caduceus by the looks of it. So lots going on in this one. So the sun crown of Apollo, which obviously when I spoke about halos, the first picture I showed was this one. But we found this one as well, which is obviously on some pottery, which also depicts Apollo with the same sort of effect. And it is very much, as you can see, it's a sun crown. That looks like the sun behind his head. And you see the sun crown turning out on the mother goddess figures again. And we've spoken about this one again previously, the winged feminine figure in what looks like a caduceus, the spiraling serpents. The sun crown turns up on the Statue of Liberty. And again, Liberty for the second time coming up tonight. And will come up again a third time as we press through this information. But it turns up on the Statue of Liberty, the sun crown. And we've spoken about this theme quite prevalently when it comes to dragons in previous Dragonology episodes. And that is the concept of theophania or theophany. In the Bible, they talk about a theophany or the theophany of the Lord, which is supposedly the appearance of God out of seemingly thin air or seemingly nowhere, or for that matter, the disappearance, the disincarnation of supposedly an incarnate or real entity, okay, theophany or theophania, which has the several root words in it. First off, the the root word, which as we already spoke about, is the singular of meaning God, theoi meaning gods, the S at the end. And phain is the root word which stems from Phanes, the god Phanes, which is just another interpretation of Mithra, and also forms the root of phantom. Now, phantoms have this quality too, to kind of supposedly appear and disappear. Also, we've been told over time through how they've been interpreted in various bits of literature. This is how we've learned ghosts operate and spirits to appear and disappear. And then we get to learn that the words appear and disappear actually have serpent root words in them. Okay, and we get a little bit more into this as we do a bit of revision from last week. For those who haven't seen last week's episode, this will make a lot more sense to you. But you'll see the same things come back up over and over again. So the theme I want to point out here again that's very prevalent with dragons is the appearance and disappearance of these entities. And of course, then the ability to shapeshift, to metamorphose from one shape into another, supposedly from human into dragon and then from dragon into human. And this is, so commonly depicted. Sometimes they're halfway between shapes, depicting this particular ability to actually change shape. And here we've got one over here with wings. But what's interesting to notice in the word metamorphosis, which expressly describes the process of changing shape, is the serpent root word orth. And theoryanthropy, which obviously again has the root word the, and also refers to the process of changing shape. So this is the Greek therianthropy, and this would be the Latin metamorphosis, referring to the same process, again, with interesting root words embedded into them, which references what they were intentioned for initially, was to refer to this process of shape-shifting by the dragons. That's how these words evolved. That's where they came from. This is the root origins of these words. So getting into words, now that we are actually starting to break them down, let's actually take a look a bit more at what the word etymology actually means, because that is what we're doing when we start looking at the root etymology of these words. The word etymology is taken from the Greek word etymos, which actually means true, actual, or real. And I thought this is rather interesting to include, is we talk about etymos meaning truth, or that which is true. Here is a depiction of truth holding a serpent. This is actually done in bronze, and it's located at the Library of Congress, Thomas Jefferson Building, Washington, D.C. Now, in previous Dragonology episodes, you may remember we showed you the goddess Sophia situated outside the library in the ruins of Ephesus. Okay, library. We get into that again. Liber, as in liberty, obviously library. We'll get there next. Okay, just to recap a bit on some of the root words, so that before we carry on, in case anybody's a bit lost, you guys sort of have them down, you've glocked them, you've conscientized them, you understand them, and you know where we're going with this. As we've already discussed, the orf and or is one of the most commonly used dragon or serpent root words, okay? And then the ophi, O-P-H-I, as we spoke about, and the vowel sounds obviously transliterate to the E and the PH. So I've got a spelling error there. And then we spoke about the kolu, kolo, kulu, kula, kala, kali, ala root, which goes into pala, para, pio, pear, and then pear like the fruit, or appear, disappear. Peer as in to look inquisitively, to spy, which would be the root of spiral. See, they all want to link into each other. And obviously, kolu being the root of column, spiro being the root of spiral, spirit, feigns, we spoke about. You get window pane and phantom, we spoke about that last week. The words jin, digit, the resting cobra in hieroglyphics, which evolved into gene, genie, genius, genesis, and jinn, like the spirit, as we've already spoken about. Apple, which evolves into Afa, Eva, Ava, and Eve. Okay. El, Il, and El, 3 different languages, Arabic, Latin, and Hebrew, and of course referencing the Elohim or the biblical angels. And basileus, basilisk, obelisk. These words obviously etymologically very similar to each other. And basilisk and obelisk very similar to each other. Basilisk, as we've already said, meaning the king. Basilisk is being the king of serpents, and then the obelisk representing a serpent. So having revised last week's words, I'm going to take you through some of what we're going to be going through this week. Having covered off some of the more visual symbols, we now go into some of the literal allegory. These are the words that are commonly associated with literature, as we spoke about. So now we're talking about literature, fable, story, legends. Okay, so we covered off already in previous weeks some of the etymology in these, but we'll recap just to draw it into context. Some of the words we're going to cover off the meanings of, and to understand why they're important and how they're rooted to the dragon, again, which makes us realize that everything about our entire culture, considering that almost everything about story, fable, tale, how it was recorded, is linked to the dragon. So rite, word, story, history, mythology, mystery, fairy tale, fable, fantasy, lecture, legend, literature, enlighten, and library. All right, right. The word right is derived from the root word rit, which is present in Ifrit, which is an Arabic classification of dragon. Now, this is when you Google Ifrit, one of the pictures that come up, and again, always notice the serpents, okay, twisting in the tree. You've got them twisting around this guy's leg here. This is it, an Ifrit, supposedly. And they were said to be able to be spirit-like or be physical and actually interact with humans. So this ability to incarnate into a physical form and then disappear, again, we're not just talking about a spirit or a ghost or an intangible entity. They're very much, as demonstrated here, tactile and tangible, able to interact with people. Okay, so this is what an Ifrit was. Again, that's where the root word comes from. Rit. Root is present in rite and ritual. Serpentine and dragon etymology. Okay, again, the or, orf, and ophi root word, as we've spoken about these ones already. And the or is present in word, story, and history. And history simply means his story, his version of events, someone's story, not necessarily the truth. In fact, I think the word history should be relegated to the association of being semi-dismissive rather than the word mythology. So myth or mythology originates with Mithra. Some people have said that myth originates with the Greek word mythos, but mythos simply means story, which brings us back to here. Okay, so everything goes round in circles. And of course, Mithra always depicted the same serpents, okay, in this Mithra depiction, Phrygian cap here. And you can see Mithra's got a lion's face, lion also always a symbol of the sun. Wings in this particular one, a serpent around the body over here. Again, serpent twisting around the body here. Always the same symbols. Mystery. The word mystery originating with the Latin word mysterium, meaning secret rite or worship, text or doctrine. Fairy tales and fables. Fairy tale and fable have a common root origin from the word fae, which in turn finds its origins with fanes. Now remember who fanes was. We'll get into fanes in a second. Fanes is the root of phantom, fantastic, fantasy, fable, fae, and fairy. And this is Fanes depicted in the cosmic egg, not unlike Mithra. How I'm always able to tell Fanes and Mithra apart is Fanes normally has these animal protrusions on his body. Mithra doesn't. Again, we've got the wings coming out of the cosmic egg and the serpent twisting around the body. All the same symbols. Same one here. This is a drawing as opposed to a marble carving. Again, notice the symbols of the zodiac all around. All right, fairies. All of us loved fairies when we were little girls, and I always used to run around with wings on my back, pretending to be a fairy. Little did I know exactly what I was supposedly interpreting or mimicking. Fae and fairies. One of the most famous Fae is someone called Morgan the Fae, who turns up in Arthurian legends, and we spoke about how the AR is transliterated from the OR last week. And of course, Morgan has the OR root in it, and Fae comes from Fanes. And Morgan is etymologically similar to Gorgon, all right? And this is Gorgon, which is again depicted with wings. This is on some ancient Greek pottery, an old crater from, I think, the 2nd century BC. But here you've got snakes on the head. You can see that over here, this Gorgon depiction, not unlike the Ifrit with its teeth. And here we go, a Gorgon temple. This is the apex of the Gorgon temple with a snake twisting, spiraling belts, snakes coming out from either side of his head, and snakes coming out of the head here. Gorgon depictions. This is an old mosaic as well. These are all from ancient Greece and ancient Rome from that period. And then, of course, the most famous Gorgon would be Medusa, and often, as well as we've already spoken about, much like Hermes, it's got the wings behind the head, as per the Versace logo. You can see it, the wings over here, and the snakes twisting around under the chin over there. That's what these would be. These would be the snakes, and as I say, that's the most certainly is the Versace logo, is the Gorgon Medusa's head. Okay, serpentine etymological correspondence. We spoke a bit about the word parable in previous Dragonology, and para comes from obviously the root stem pala, para, pio. Now, we've spoken about what fey means. And what's interesting to note is this fey means the same thing as para, and when you put the bill onto the back of para bill and fey bill, you end up with exactly the same definition, because the first piece actually refers to the same thing, which is the dragon. So a fable is defined as a short tale to teach a moral lesson. Well, what's a parable? Defined as a short allegorical tale to teach a truth or a moral lesson. Got that specifically out of the same dictionary. So they basically mean the exact same thing, even though the first sort of like etymon, or the first syllables are actually, or the first part of the word is actually written differently, they refer to the same thing because they come from roots via different languages referencing the dragon. All right, myths and legends. Myth and legend are synonymous, the two words. They seem to just go together. So let's have a look at what the word legend actually is. A legend is defined as a story or narrative dealing with a happening or event. Legend is rooted in the Latin word legere, meaning to read, gather, or select, demonstrative of lecture. So lecture comes from the same root as legend. And we've spoken about this correspondence in previous Dragonology episodes. Serpentine etymological correspondence with lecture would be a lesson, which you'd learn at school as a scholar. And the word skolex, which also refers to a dragon, is where the word school and scholar came from. The kolo, kolu, kulu root would be the root of college, okay? And obviously, etymologically similar to college is knowledge. And someone who is good at college and has a lot of knowledge would be referred to as a genius, which comes from the root word gin, gene, geone, genesis, origin. So it all ties into each other. Lovely multi-layered tapestry of language. And of course, we always come back to the same sort of principles and the same themes, and light and dark are very much one of the key themes that come up with dragons. So literature has the word lit in it, which obviously is present in the word light and enlighten. And we spoke a bit about word reversing. So light, lit, light. Now, if you actually take the IL of light and lit, which is the root of lit and light, and illuminate would be to light, but you're swapping it around. You're putting it to the IL instead of the LI. Again, Illuminati, same thing would happen. And of course, that immediately brings you to the root word lu, which brings you to Lucifer, Luxfer, light bringer. It all ties into each other. And of course, the LI brings you to library. The word library comes from the Latin word liber, meaning free, supposedly. But as we know, black is white and white is black. Dark is light and light is dark. Everything is twisted on its head and everything is upside down in this world, and we are taught exactly the opposite of what we're meant to believe. We're taught concepts and definitions that actually in effect mean something else for almost absolutely everything in existence. And this is very much demonstrated in the themes as we cover them off, how dark and light are tied into these themes. Now, one of my favorite people to deal with in the context of dragon mythology is the character Melusine. And I've spoken plenty about Melusine. I've done little documentaries on Melusine. And a really interesting part of history is to have a look at the Melusine story. Often known as Melusina, Melusine with an E at the end, Melusine or Melusig. Basically, the Lusignan castle in France, named after Melusine, which she supposedly was able to build with her magical gifts. But yes, before we get into the stories, actually look at the etymological root of Melusine. As discussed last week, Mel, being the root of my own name, means dark. And we talk about melanoma, which is a dark-colored skin cancer, melanosis, which means the process of going dark. To caramelize the sugar means to make it dark, or you caramelize the onions. It's the darkening process. It's the caramel, that means darkening. Okay, so Mel means dark, and Lucina, like Lucifer, as we've already seen here, Lucifer simply means light bringer. And that's where the root of Lucina comes in, light. Melusine is dark and light, literally. And in heraldic depictions of Melusine that we've been able to find of her, normally depicted with one wing dark and one wing light. Now, here's another few interesting things about Melusine we have to notice is, of course, wearing a crown, which we've spoken about tonight, having a long tail like a serpent or fish-like countenance, like one of the fish gods. And of course, here's a little serpent also with a crown on its head sitting on a cup, most likely the Holy Grail, because the Grail turns up again and again and again in various stories throughout mythology and quite literally references the dragon bloodline, because red wine was reference of blood and serpent on a cup filled with blood references the dragon bloodline. And that's what Melusine was, dragon bloodline, as we can see from all the symbols that surround her. This is an old painting of Melusine, which was an absolute treasure to find. You can see how cracked it is. But again, here is Melusine being depicted with the sort of fish or serpent-like tails. Melusine is often depicted holding a tail in each hand. In this particular one, she's got a crown on. Here's some more carvings of Melusine. This is a sculpture. And of course, Melusine turns up in the Starbucks coffee logo, the Starbucks Dragon Queen, as I call her. Now, the story of Melusine is very, very interesting, actually, and I'll spend a bit of time quickly recapping it so it's in context for everybody. Melusine was actually one of three. There were three different Melusines, according to history. And I'm not sure exactly which one came where or how the story chronologically went, but the story was Melusine was born as one of three triplets to a woman called Pressine, who apparently married the king of Scotland, King Elenus, and he was this king of Elba, or Albany at the time, which I think became Glasgow. And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. Glasgow is interesting. But basically, Melusine was one of three sisters, and she married a king. And so it's said that she had a special condition that had to be met as part of her marriage, and that was that she be left alone in her bathing chamber once a week so that she could bathe, and no one was allowed to enter. And supposedly this is where she'd go from human into a dragon form, was in her bathtub. So this happened once every 7 days, and rumors spread about Melusine, and her partner, the prince was, or the Count of Anjou, I think he was at the time, was actually encouraged to have a little look in, and he saw that she was not completely human. I can imagine his surprise. And this is, in fact, a real story. But if you do your genealogical research, that you'll find that there were 3 different Queen Melusines, and one of them the story actually does apply to. It's not a fairy tale. It's been relegated to sort of, as we say, semi-dismissive, the things you tell your children when they go to bed. Melusine was born to Queen Pressine. Melusine's sisters were known as Melior, again, same root as Melusine, Melior and Palatine. Notice the pala as in palace, and that's an interesting root. Again, we've covered that off in previous Dragonologies. Palatine, pala is a serpent root, like royalty live in palaces, okay? All 3 sisters were said to live at Avalon, and we'll get into Avalon because Avalon just turns up again and again. They're all said to live at Avalon for some time. Now, Palatine was also known as Plantina. So the name Palatine turned to Plantina. And Plantina gave the name to the house of Plantagenet. You know, it seems like a funny name, Plantagenet. Well, it came from Plantina. The house of Plantagenet was seeded by Plantina, and in fact, Plantagenet can be literally translated to Plantina's genetics. Look at the second part of Plantagenet. Quite literally is the first part of genetics, the word genetics, okay? That means Plantina's genetics. That's what Plantagenet means, Plantina's genes. Those descended from Plantina, or Palatine, the sister of Melusine. And a little bit about the house of Plantagenet, who were initially of French descent, originating from the house of Anjou. Again, the J can be transliterated into a G. So the Ange is actually the root of angel. As we spoke about earlier, the house of Anjou and angel. There's a reason why England is called England, because it originates from the word Anglo. And Anglo actually, I believe, came from Anjou. And it happened when this happened, which was when the French descendants originating from Anjou ended up holding the English thrones from 1154 to 1485. That's how England became named England. And in fact, if you, the English language comes from the fact that we call England England and we speak English. But if you look at what the word English is in Dutch, it's Engels. And what is the Dutch word for angel? It's engel. It's the same word. English is the language of the angels. Very much evidenced by the fact that the kings came from the Angevin dynasty. So the Angevin dynasty held the English throne from 1154 to 1485, starting with King Henry II and ending with the death of King Richard III. From 1144, 2 successive counts won control over the vast assembly of lands that became known as the Angevin Empire. The first of these counts, namely Geoffrey, became Duke of Normandy in 1144. His successor, Henry, then added Aquitaine to his empire by marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152. Henry then successfully pursued a claim from his paternal grandfather, Henry I of England, to become the King of England. From Henry IV's son, from Henry's 4th son, John, the dynasty produced a long line, which is 14 English kings. The name Plantagenet, which historians use for the entire dynasty, dates from the 15th century and comes from the 12th century nickname of Geoffrey, who took the name Palatine or Plantina as signs of the dragon and genetics, the royal dragon genetics, for obviously those who could decipher it. So that's the reason he took this name, is so people could understand. Those who could decipher it would know where he came from. And this is why they do it. Like Columbus, Christopher Columbus took his name Columbus so people would understand where he came from. Spoke about this already. This is the Queen Melusine secret discovered. And this is obviously when the Count Andrew discovered Melusine is half dragon. And this is a 14th century depiction of this particular scene, which is very interesting. It ended up in a child's book. This is actually from a storybook that you read to kids when they went to bed, supposedly. Very interesting depiction of Queen Melusine there with little wings on her in a bathtub and supposedly her husband looking through the hole at her. And apparently when he found her, she turned into a fully formed dragon and flew away. That over here is sort of another depiction of her with her children, supposedly. Here's some more depictions of Melusine. This was actually a manuscript that's in a museum in Munich. You'll notice how depicted with a long serpent-like tail. Always the same themes that come up over and over again. And of course, we talked about the condition Melusine gave her partner, that he obviously couldn't see her while she was bathing. And there often is a hard and fatal condition to any pairing of dragon and human, or mortal and fae. And again, the story of Melusine has been reinterpreted in the modern day to a film called Splash, which is just a reinterpretation of the Melusine story, starring Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks, came out in 1984, and basically, again, plays out the same theme, which you'll find coming up in so many stories, and we'll take you through some of them. But this hard condition of the pairing of dragon and human, or mermaid and human, and mermaids are dragons. They're not two different creatures, and we'll cover that off next week when I go into creatures of mythology. They're referencing the same creature. They're not two different creatures. So there's a hard and fatal condition normally to the pairing of dragon and humans. And this is illustrated in The Lord of the Rings, where Arwen, who is supposedly fae, fairy, elven, okay, is paired with Aragorn, who is human. And she must choose a mortal life in order to be with him. Again, there's often a hard and fatal choice that has to be made for any pairing of mortal and fae, or dragon and human. And this comes up quite a lot. It's a very common theme. One of the hard and fatal conditions often that's being hidden is, in fact, this is real stuff. Imagine you're a human and suddenly you had to be paired with a dragon, and you didn't know this thing is a dragon, and you had to, be sexual intimate with them. I mean, that's a pretty hard condition. And this is very much often described as rape if you're forced to be sexual with something that you perhaps don't want to. And the theme of rape comes up again and again in artworks, again referring to this hard and fatal condition to any pairing of mortal and fae. This is Giulio Romano's painting from 1450, and depicts Jupiter raping Olympia, or Semele. As we've already spoke about, Semele was the moon goddess. And you can know this is Jupiter because what you've got over here was Zeus. Zeus was the Greek version of what then became relabeled as Jupiter under the Romans because of the eagle and the thunderbolts. But again, notice these serpent-like legs. This is beautifully done, by the way, a lovely piece of artwork. But this is effectively a scene of a dragon raping a human, referring again to the theme of this hard and fatal pairing, which comes up again and again. And let's go through a couple of them. Paul Peter Rubens, a highly initiated artist. We spoke about artists last week, and I actually should have covered him off too, because to tell you what, this guy's definitely knew a few things. This is a depiction of the rape of Diana and the nymphs. And you can see these animals are fawns, look like Pan with the horns and the goat's legs, chasing after and grabbing these naked women, which are nymphs. And Diana was a moon goddess as well. But yeah, all these fawns grabbing this woman and sort of, it's called Rape of Diana. That's what this painting is actually called. And of course, we've covered this off in nearly every Dragonology, but it does keep coming back, is this picture of, or this carving of Pan having sex with a goat. This doesn't look consensual, by the way. This goat's got his sort of hoof up there pushing away kind of thing. This is a very common depiction as well. We spoke about the goddess Europa, who's often depicted like the Virgin Mary with a halo of stars around her head. And this is the Rape of Europa, which is, if you go Google it, one of the most painted pictures by the masters. Can't believe how often this picture has, or this theme, the Rape of Europa, has been repainted by artists. Clearly they really like painting about the Rape of Europa. Interesting to notice these little beautiful dragon fishy type beings, which are pretty groovy. And again, the little winged angels. Now, cherubs, cupids, putti, any of these little beings, little angel, cheruby type things are all representations of the dragon. But what's particularly disturbing about this one is this is the Rape of Europa. It's supposedly these little things here that are raping Europa. Look, hand grabbing Europa's ankle. So she's holding onto the horns, and he's looking like, all this being here looks like pulling on her this way while she's trying to sort of maybe get away. Yeah, very uncomfortable that it looks like little children trying to do this. Again, there's a lot of twistage here, a lot of allegory towards pedophilic themes, perhaps. And we will get a bit more into that when I cover off cults and rituals in a bit more detail in another Dragonology. And again, this the story of Cupid and Psyche is a long and very complex one, and I shan't go into it in terribly great detail, but to say that there is a theme here which has been reinterpreted into the Disney film being Beauty and the Beast. But basically, Cupid falls in love with a girl called Psyche, and he takes her, she goes to live in his palace, but doesn't know what he looks like. He doesn't show his full countenance to her. But Cupid's dad hears from the oracle that Psyche's married a dragon, and basically he impregnates her without her even knowing what this Cupid looks like. It's all very allegorical. And when she goes up to his castle, she's served a dinner that is served by itself, and there's a singing lyra which sings itself, and it's all very similar to the themes of the Beauty and the Beast, where the beast hid his appearance for a while, and then I noticed the horns, same themes. And of course you had the singing cutlery and the dinner which served itself, the tea which served itself. Very similar themes. Beauty and the Beast is just another version of the Cupid and Psyche story. Now, Cinderella. All right, now I've got to have a sip for this because, my word, we spoke about this last week. We got into the whole theme of what glass means. Now, arts and crafts, a lot of what has been given to us in our culture, modern day culture, glass making has been passed on to us by the dragons. And Cinderella and the glass slipper is allegorical of this, okay? So bear with me here because this goes on quite a little bit of a ride. Why is Cinderella so big? And why have this particular focus on this? Why do we need to bring a reference to the glass slipper? It is because Cinderella's castle is the central focus of Disney. Okay, I've been to Disneyland in Orlando, Florida, and it is, little girls dream this castle. Absolutely amazing. It's truly magnificent, especially when the fireworks go off behind it. But it also, this castle forms the central focus of the Walt Disney Pictures logo. Okay, Cinderella's castle. So why is Cinderella's castle so important? That it's a central focus of Disneyland and of the Walt Disney logo. Why not Mickey Mouse be the central focus of the Walt Disney's logo? And there's a lot of interesting things. This obviously off Vigilant Citizen. If you start to look at the sacred geometry of the castle and how it's been laid out, there's a lot of interesting things to notice, and it's actually aligned with some of the stars in the sky. I won't get it too much into this because I'm not terribly sure how accurate it is. However, to say that Disney has a lot to account for with regards to how it has completely messed children up. Disney media has historically played a role in the mind control of children, and very evident by people who wear these sort of mouse ears, celebrities who put the mouse ears on. It's a sign that they are mind controlled. Marilyn Manson. But yeah, Walt Disney himself, not a good man at all. Knighted as well, like his brother, but also a pedophile and 33rd degree Freemason. Very interesting. So we're talking about glass. Obviously, we're talking over here about Cinderella and the glass slipper. Okay. Glass is a symbol of the dragon bloodline, as the crafts of glassmaking was given to humanity by the dragons. Etymological evidence of this exists in words such as window pane, which is rooted in fane. We spoke about the god Fanes, okay, and windows and stained glass always turning up in churches and stuff, which we covered off last week when we did architecture. Now, glass turns up in the name of Glastonbury, place in Somerset, England. Glastonbury is a place steeped in mystery and folklore and hosts the world's most famous annual music festival around the summer solstice. And this is not by accident. Obviously, big rituals like this in places of energetic significance obviously play into this whole sort of locking down of the Ophidian vibration, and that's done especially through music. So music festival, again in red, because that's cult ritualism. And just some pictures of Glastonbury. This is Glastonbury Tour, and this is not a natural feature. No one's actually quite sure how this has been made, but it is believed that at one stage this was all built up to be a massive, massive sort of castle. And this is kind of all that remains of it. And the whole area around it was flooded. The Somerset levels were drained in about the 13th century, I think it was, or 12th century. But basically, Glastonbury was once completely surrounded by marshlands and water. It was, in fact, an isle. And this is Glastonbury Abbey, and the grave of King Arthur was supposedly found at the site of Arthur's tomb. In the year 1191, the bodies of King Arthur and his queen were said to have been found on the south side of the Lady Chapel. On the 19th of April, 1278, the remains were removed in the presence of King Edward I and the Queen Eleanor. And it was moved to a black marble tomb on this site. This tomb survived until the dissolution of the abbey in 1539. You can see it's all in ruins. But apparently, this was found buried in the tomb, which was a tree trunk tomb, a leaden plate in the form of a cross, which is found in the King Arthur's grave at Glastonbury. And the inscription was in Latin, and basically the translation reads, "Here lies interred in the Isle of Avalon the renowned King Arthur." So we know King Arthur founded Glastonbury Abbey, indicated that the area that was once Glastonbury is in fact what was once Avalon. So Avalon did exist, okay? And according to Arthurian legends, even before he was founded Glastonbury, it was known that he died at Avalon, because that's where Morgan Le Fay lived. And Morgan Le Fay and his sisters looked after Arthur. And Morgan Le Fay was said to be a bloodline relative of Arthur. We spoke about who Morgan Le Fay is. They looked after Arthur till his death, after he was fatally wounded at the Battle of Camlan. Okay, so Glastonbury is said to be Avalon, based on the fact that the remains of King Arthur were found buried in the grounds of Glastonbury Abbey. Arthur's full name is Arthur Pendragon, interestingly enough. Arthur Pendragon, named after his father, Uther Pendragon, and obviously Pendragon means head dragon. Now, the story of King Arthur was that he pulled a sword from a stone and became king. No one else could pull the sword out of the stone, but Arthur could. So Arthur became king after he pulled the sword from the stone. The sword became famous and became known as Excalibur. And of course, it has the Kali, Kalo, Kalu, Kulu, Kula, Kali root in it. and is associated with the rightful claim to the throne of Britain. Okay, so that's interesting. So referring to, again, Kali root comes from the Kolo, Kolu, Kula, Kala, Kulu root, which is prevalent in Columbus, Columbia, Column, Dracula, colony. So Kali forming the root of Excalibur, or Caliburn was the other name for this sword, and we'll get onto what that means in a second. Okay, now the Grail and the sword are inextricable symbols of the dragon bloodline and turn up in so many different legends and stories of history. In fact, the word sword in Dutch is zwaard, and the word for black or dark is zwart. So etymologically, they're very similar as well. When we're talking about black and white, light and dark. But yeah, the Holy Grail turns up in Arthurian legends as Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Okay, all of them with crowns, and you may notice crowns. And it's not by accident. Swords, Grail, or the sword and chalice are linked in ritual. The sword obviously representing the phallus, the male generative principle, and the chalice representing the female passive principle. The active and passive generative principles of the universe represented by the swords and the chalice and used in ritual to represent the sexual generative joining. So serpent and chalice. We spoke about this a bit last week. Saint John. We come back to John. We will do a whole Dragonology episode on Saint John, who obviously is always depicted holding a grail or a holy chalice with a serpent on it, which obviously is representative of the dragon bloodline, because wine would be representative of blood. So, as I say, holy blood, holy grail. The grail is a symbol of the sacred royal dragon bloodline. And this for me, before we go to the next picture, we just have to take a pause here for a minute, because one of the places that the Holy Grail turns up in is the stories of Jesus and the Last Supper. The Holy Grail was supposedly the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper and that caught his blood upon being crucified. Okay, now this is a depiction of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. Okay, it's been digitized because the other one's so very ruined, but this is kind of closer to what the original would have looked like. So digitally enhanced, and The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. Notice all the drinking vessels on the table. Okay, what are they made of? If Jesus drank from the Holy Grail, okay, what is became known as the Holy Grail, the cup of the covenant, okay, which had red wine in. All these cups are made of glass, okay. So that's what the Holy Grail was made of, was glass. That's why glass is so important. We talk about going back. Just want to come back to the Glastonbury, okay. We're talking about last week how Leonardo da Vinci was a secret society initiate and how he knew certain things. Why was the Holy Grail not depicted as perhaps a Holy Grail like the gold ones we keep seeing, but it was depicted as a glass with red wine in so we could see it. Clear see-through glass. So Glastonbury, let's have a look at the etymology. Okay, Glastonbury, the place where the glass represented bloodline is buried. So that takes care of glass and bury, all right? What about the ton? Anyone who watches CCN regularly, and you checked out Sasha Stone's interview with Jay Parker, who is a survivor of cult-based ritual family. Jay Parker was raised in a family who practiced cult-based ritualism, often relegated under the title of Satanism. This man claims that any place named with Ton, T-O-N, in the name, or at the end of the name, has been founded and named by Satanists or cult ritualists. Interesting. So coming back to the glass slipper, if the shoe fits, wear it. In the story of Cinderella, the royal bloodline of the prince must seek out the right bloodline, and only the right caliber will do, being the foot that fits the glass slipper. I hope the penny's starting to drop round about this point. So much like only the right caliber could pull Excalibur from the stone, the royal bloodline, the dragon bloodline, who was Arthur Pendragon, pulled the sword from the stone, so the glass slipper would only fit the royal dragon bloodline. So this whole seeking out Porphyra Gentius or the dragon bloodline to marry, this interbreeding and obsession with bloodlines, historical throughout royal history. People have always known about this, but this is an indication of how it spills over into fairy tale, is that being represented by the glass slipper. Okay, so let's look at the etymology of Avalon, shall we? According to official records, the name Avalon can be traced to the Welsh name Ynys Afalon, meaning Isle of Apples. Okay, and apples have always been prevalent in the Somerset area. Here's an apple tree, and that's Glastonbury Tor up there. So let's have a look at this. Avalon shares a root with Babylon and London. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. Okay, and then of course we've dealt with the Ava root before. Ava being taken from Affa. Anyone who speaks German or Dutch will know it's easy to transliterate the V to the F, because the V sound in German or Dutch is actually said as a F sound, like an F, and it would be a W that sounds like a V in Dutch or German. So for example, what some people in English would call a Volkswagen is actually pronounced Volkswagen, because the V is pronounced as an F in the German and Dutch tongue. So Ava actually transliterates from Affa, which means viper. Okay, and it's not hard to transliterate Ava from the A and the E. Obviously, the vowel sounds easily transliterate from each other, as we've seen historically through the course of this work. And of course, again, transliterating into Eve. Apples and Eve, familiar much? Again, we keep coming back to this theme of creation, the origins, the genesis. Yeah, not by coincidence. So you've got apples and Eve coming up again, linked together. Interesting. And of course, Lucifer comes in, the light bringer. We've already been there this evening. Let's see where this ends up. The English word Avalon, the Welsh version of Avalon is Ynys Afalon. Well, it's said that Avalon comes from the Welsh version, Ynys Afalon. But Afalon, take a look at that. They're actually a fallen. If you talk about a fallen, you talk about a fallen angel. Talk about a fallen angel, you talk about Lucifer, don't you? Lucifer, the light bringer. Now, supposedly Lucifer is relegated to being bad, but was the light bringer. So again, this black is white and white is black. Light and dark kind of play a contrasting and contradicting role. And we'll get a bit more into that when we go into cult ritualism in some of our next episodes. But you've got to understand, just to finish this off, that one of the biggest and most important themes to understand about the dragons is the universal duality. Dragons are often depicted surrounding a yin and yang, or the yin and yang symbol is often a representation of the dragon, okay, representing the duality of light and dark, black and white, yin and yang, male and female, the active and passive generative principles of the universe, known as the positive and negative, or the good and evil, otherwise known as God and the devil. And we deal with that, of course, in next week's episode of Dragonology, which is episode 6, which deals with gods, creatures, and beasts of myths and legend. And episode 6 will be airing on the 30th of April, 2015, 9 p.m. London time. So, guys, please do join us. And if anyone is interested in getting the Dragonology, the Encyclopedia of Dragons published, sponsorship is required for this project. Feel free to go over to consciousconsumernetwork.tv, click on the big red heart, and donate to us to help get this project off the ground. And of course, sponsor and support free and independent media. That's what we are. And of course, it's been great to be with you again for another episode of Dragonology. I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Melvi, and I'll see you guys next week.